Okay. Yes.
Alrighty.
And it's live. Okay, let me check with my computer.
Okay.
Doing Sophia.
I got it. Not in. Oh no. So, why did you crash?
I apologize in advance to everyone else who might be hungry.
You're good.
Why do I have to update Flash?
Oh, yeah, there's that stupid big flash bug.
Flash.
I walked into class before eating like a full.
I tried to take it as an opportunity to recognize when a website is using Flash and not use
See, we had a
Flash,
guy in 361.
because it's not an open source tool. And there are open source alternatives.
2 times or all 3 times a week, just the entire semester brought Subway.
Wow.
We literally started calling him Sandwich Guy. Nobody knew his name. But he always had a freaking sub.
Oh, dang it.
Download faster.
Seriously?
Yeah.
This thing is. Oh. I should act faster on my ideas, I swear.
I'm not.
I had the idea of integrating like fingerprint detection into your screen, but apparently Apple just filed a patent for that. They did it too quickly. I have other ideas.
Sounds like a tricky problem.
Yeah, this is what I'm wondering, how they would accomplish this, because I know that they accomplished it with the button, but how would you accomplish it with the screen where like the entire screen recognizes your finger?
Mm-hmm.
I'll like sneak up there and see.
Sure. Sorry.
I did not extend extra credit to my 130 class for this, just the 230 student. So, I'm not sure. I told him about it, but
See if it works on this computer. Oh, the computer.
Hey, Tim.
What's up, buddy?
Hey, how you been?
I was gonna bring the books, but I forgot.
My books?
Yeah, the books that were in the office.
Oh, man.
I put them all out right next to the front door.
I completely
Okay,
forgot.
it hurts.
Awesome.
Wait, where are they? Like,
On the internet.
The front door of my house.
oh,
Yeah.
don't say
I know, but here's the internet.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to how difficult it would be to play this game on 2 screens at the same time.
I don't know.
You're gonna bring me one?
I was about to try this.
yeah.
See how bad they
I'm
fail.
going
Yeah, my poor iPod.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, it's the same grade.
Cool.
Have you talked to Blair or you hung out with him?
I did. And I also met his evil twin.
I made it through one.
He looks just like Diego, but he has a goatee. I'm not kidding.
That does sound like evil.
Oh well,
Is he the same height?
making poor decisions.
Okay.
Is he the same height?
Hey, can you pass that list to me?
He doesn't have long hair though.
That'd be cool.
I made it through 2 on my iPod and only 1 on my phone.
I tried to get him.
It's difficult to do.
But he's like, what would it do for me? And I said,
Does this plug work?
Dude, that's not the
Sure.
open source, right?
no, I'm gonna start talking to him. Did you bring your red hat?
Oh, I didn't bring a
There's
red hat.
no
I'm
door
good.
for the door.
They give everybody one.
Yeah.
I've got a fedora.
Yeah. Does it sit on the desk? He keeps it.
hey, Andrew.
We can start now. Yeah.
What time do you actually want to start?
I don't know. Who's from the security club?
You just let out.
Okay. Maybe a few more minutes.
Cool.
And then
So what have you been working on recently?
Still telescopes, I have 12 more to work on now.
Man, it's gonna be hard to do something else after working on telescopes all the time. That's super cool.
We're going next weekend.
To telescopes. Oh, I gotta get it.
Oh, you don't have to get it.
Nice. I will do that. I've recently acquired a loaner 8-inch dot.
Okay.
Are you watching the? Tell me if it like dies when I switch over to one to another.
it's like a little laggy,
Oh, really?
but
Oh, yeah. There's a room full of,
like
there's a room in the
I
basement.
don't know where he's gonna stand.
It's just full of
Yeah.
telescopes.
Either does it look like it's just stopped or something?
Telescopes.
Does it
Lots
look
of
like it's stopped or
people
does it?
Man,
I see it in the, like, during when I sit.
You wouldn't see anything from Raleigh,
No.
right?
it's surprising. Like, it's not so bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it's clearly sitting.
Well,
You're not-
maybe more like
Vegas.
It doesn't look like it's sitting there, but she's.
Yeah, he's shaking.
that's.
He's
What are
shaking.
you-
Okay.
He's in the genius.
I think it's like a little bit behind.
Yeah, it's lagging.
Okay.
Sometimes
Because
it's
it's
nice
not
to be like.
technically.
It's not fully live, but it's probably as close as you can get.
He seems like a idiot.
I don't know what team he's on, but he's on QE.
That's all I know. That's what he does.
He was a Minecraft to
Does he really?
That
That seems
He's
weirdly possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose you've been good to be listening to
You
your
wanna start?
actions.
Yeah, you want to start?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello,
Don't
everyone.
forget.
I'm Austin MacDonald, and I actually went to school here last year, for those of you who didn't attend it. But I've since gotten a job. I work at Red Hat. I'm an associate software engineer. And I work on the TULP team, which is a upstream project of satellite, which is all about configuration management of large systems. I'm not going to talk to you about satellite, but I am going to talk to you about how to get started in an open source career, which I highly recommend. So before I get started, actually, I need to tell the story of this slideshow. I borrowed this from Michael Ribnack, who's a friend of mine who went to school here in the music department, but he's now my boss. So first of all, why open source? There's so many great tools out there that are not open source. There are so many things that are made every day that are just magical things, but they're not open source. So why would you choose to do something that is? First of all, and this is a little bit cliche, freedom. And there's an expression that's always talked about in the open source community, free as in beer, free as in speech. Now, this freedom is obviously free as in speech, but when you're using software that is not, that you cannot see the source code, you just have to trust that it does what it says that it's going to do, you have to trust that it's safe, and you have to trust that there's no ill intent inside of it. There's no way to know. And in fact, it would be illegal for you to find out. And that, I think, is a personal affront to freedom. Second is the efficiency. We are all standing on the backs of giants, and we all know this. Everybody in Mark Armstrong's class doing the 261 stuff with those circuits and things, those guys were geniuses, and we are literally building on their work. But often we find ourselves solving problems that have been solved already because somebody solved this problem and didn't tell anyone, or they put a patent on it and hid it. So this solution is just forever going to be resolved over and over and over. So open source combats this by solve it once, solve it well, and if you want to solve it again, that's fine. And if you do it better, maybe everyone will switch to that. It's a very, very one-directional system. It's always getting better. I touched on security briefly, but if you guys have been paying attention to the news, there's been quite a few instances of very bad security flaws recently, and you might point out that many of them were in open source software recently. Well, the thing that's important to realize is that these bugs were found by open source people. When they're found by the right people, as these bugs were, they're not exploited. There's a very careful approach to how to solve these things. And often there's a patch that is available before it's even announced that it's a thing. So if you found a bug in Windows, for instance, there would be no way to patch that without knowing what the code is. And there would be no way to find it in the first place if you can't see it. So having many eyes on the code is the best way to make sure that something is secure. Transparency is also super important, specifically when it comes to DRM and that sort of thing. If you're using iTunes, well, older iTunes, that can only play a specifically encoded piece of music, then that means that that software is doing something that you do not have control over. And if you decide not to use iTunes in the future, you can't use that music anymore. And I think that Apple's actually moved away from this, but DRM is still a problem in many kinds of media. And that is not a problem when it comes to open source stuff. And the big obvious one is that it's cost effective. This is free as in beer. Open source code is free. You can download it, you can use it, you can modify it, you can do whatever you want really within the scope of the license. But point is, it doesn't cost you anything. So now I'd like to talk about the potential benefits. Like, these are broad, general things. Let's talk more concretely. This is better for employers. When you're interviewing a candidate, you want to see the code that that person has written. And if that code is proprietary and off in some patent land, there's no way to see what's actually been done. You have to take their word for it, and what you end up doing is hiring people who are very good at presenting things that they may or may not have done. And that's not ideal. If you've got a GitHub account and you contribute to open source, your employer can see exactly the code that you wrote. They can see how much you contributed. They can see how often you contributed. It's way better for making decisions. That being said, it's better for you because they can see these things. This makes it a meritocracy. If you're doing good work, you can show it off. There's a big set of skills that you learn in open source software. And the nice thing about these skills is that because these tools are freely available, you can use them again. You find a different job, you can use the same tool set, or you can bring in those old tools. They're often very similar. In fact, there's lots of open source groups that come up with standard ways that things need to happen. Message buses, for instance. HTTP responses. These things are all standardized by these groups. And if you're using open source tools, they're much more likely to fall in line with these things. Proprietary things often build their own protocols and then are you're forced to learn an entirely different system. There's a statistic that I question. However, I've heard, and I think there's probably some merit to it. There's a bug in every 100 lines of code of proprietary software. And there's a bug in every 1,000 lines in open source code. I don't have a citation, so sorry. You'll just have to believe me, but I don't believe me, so you know. And this is the biggest thing. Open source code is so much more flexible because you can look at a piece of code, you can say, oh, darn, it does almost exactly what I need. Well, if it's open source, you can change it. you can make it do exactly what you need. And then if you are going to be a good contributor, you send it back to the guys who made it. And they may or may not pull that in, that everybody has that too. But if it's not open source, you're restricted to having to completely rebuild the whole thing from scratch. And this is just, it's not efficient and it's not sustainable. So I hope I've convinced you that open source is amazing and that you should do it. So how are you going to do it? It's not as easy as some people will tell you. It just takes doing, honestly. So step one, be a user. And this is, if you're not already in this camp, you're not going to believe me, and it's going to be really hard to sell this, but you've got to use Linux. If you do not know how to use Linux, you are going to be in trouble. Linux is super powerful. Almost every server is running Linux. 95% of Fortune 500 companies are running Linux. Red Hat Linux, actually. The thing is that Linux is a very, very powerful system. It's fast, it's flexible, and you can fix it if it breaks. These are super important things, and Linux is being so much more widely accepted in the engineering community that you really can't get by without knowing Linux. Also, if you're going to be developing open source software, you really have to be on Linux because the open source community doesn't use anything else. Well, with the exception of Macs, which we won't get into. So if you're going to use Linux, and I suggest that you do need to leave a little bit of extra time to solve your problems. I got here a little early because I had to plug into this thing, and who knows what's going to happen. This thing was designed for Windows, but it worked. And it wasn't actually painful, but it could have been, and I wanted to be able to address that if it did cause problems. And as you get started, you will discover that every single thing that you try to do will cause a problem. And it seems so bad, but I promise you that there are a finite number of these recurring problems, and once you learn them, they go away. So if you're trying to get into this stuff, find other people who are doing this. There's lots of people who are all into open source, and I can tell you that almost every one of them is extremely excited about helping you. So, I mean, there are lots of nerds like me who, if you came up and said, hey, will you help me install Linux? I would lose it. And so would everybody. Like, this is a very exciting thing for us to help you. So let us help you. Lugs are Linux user groups, and guess what? Greensboro has one. You should all join, and you should go, because they're really cool guys, and they do lots of interesting things, and they do lots of things that you wouldn't even think of, and maybe even some bad ideas, like, hey, I just resurrected a machine from 1992, and I'd like to put Fedora on it. Let's do it. It doesn't work, but it's a fun project. And so one of the things that everyone always says is, oh, I'd love to use Linux, but it doesn't work with Burr. So there is something called a virtual machine, and I hope that you all learn how to use these. But a virtual machine is essentially a computer within your computer, and you can install anything on it. You will need a Windows license if you want to put Windows in your virtual machine, or OS X, you can do the same thing. Most of the time you'd put other Linux boxes in, but admittedly, unfortunately, VMs are not great for video games. So for you gamers, I recommend dual boot. But for anything else that's not graphics card, memory intensive, I suggest doing it in a VM. And this will allow you to really build these skills that are extremely marketable. Okay, so you're a user. You're beginning to become comfortable with the command line. You know how everything's working, and you feel comfortable solving problems as they arise. So now, take it a step farther. Do something. This is an example of some things that you might try. And every one of them is going to give you all kinds of crazy problems that you can solve and learn a lot in the process. But if you can do these things, these are exactly the kind of skills that will help you to find a job. These are the kinds of things that you can bring up in a job interview that shows that you're a problem solver. It shows that when you are unsure of what to do, you find a way. And it shows that you know how to find that information. Okay, so now you've set up a website. You are using some cool open source tool like Django, and you just found that it does this weird thing, and you really wish it did this other thing. Well, you can write your own code to make that happen, but if you really think that it could benefit everyone, contribute it back. However, I have to tell you, that's the example that a lot of people will often say for getting into open source, but it's a trickier thing than that. So I suggest starting a little bit lighter. So find a project that you really like. For me, this was the Center for Open Science, making science better. What is better than that? So find a project and do whatever they want you to do. Often these people are really willing to help. And if they're willing to help mentor you, you should just do whatever they can throw at you. Improving documentation is one of the best places to get started, because I was told recently that experts, everything's obvious. Beginners, nothing is obvious. So who's writing the documentation? It's the experts. So of course it's going to be really unclear to you who doesn't know it. So one of the things that I like to do is when I'm using a new tool, when I don't know anything, I go through the docs as I'm going. I take notes of where it's unclear, where I had to research other things, all that sort of stuff. And then I make those changes and I submit it in a pull request. And often these people are extremely excited. People love when other people are not only using their stuff, but want to make it better. And why wouldn't they? They want your help. This is just more stuff that they don't have to do. If you are able to find a bug in some software, find a great way of reproducing it. Make sure that it really isolates the problem. Make sure that you can cause it every single time. If you can do that, then that will give them a much better place to start, even if you can't fix it yourself. Yeah.
So you're saying we can actually take like a few things?
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, they love it. A couple years ago, I was using some, I think it was maybe Code Academy or one of those, something to learn coding. And they gave me access to, I'd like earned enough points or something that I could change my theme. And so it gave me a little field where I could enter whatever color I wanted, and it was just a hex color. So I typed something that was not a hex color in there, and the website completely crashed. And every time I logged in, it would immediately go to this fake color, and I couldn't see anything. So I emailed the developer and explained what happened. He added a validation. He fixed my thing. He was grateful. It was awesome. Yes? Yeah. Regression testing is a huge technical debt that especially larger teams have. You fix a bug, you fix another bug. Is that first bug still fixed? Probably. But do you really want to take the time to go back and look? Bigger companies will have entire teams dedicated to doing this, and they'll have automated test suites to prevent just that. But smaller open source projects online often don't. And so going through bug logs and reproducing these things is an excellent way to do this. To take it another step farther, let's say you kind of figure out what's going on, write a unit test that reproduces the bug and fails. This will give the developer an opportunity to really see what's going on. And if it's a good test, they may just use it, and then they can use test-driven development to move forward with that. And obviously, if you can, fix them. Nothing makes an open source maintainer happier than getting a bug fix that they don't have to do anything. They just have to look over it, make sure it all works, and just accept it. That's so much work saved on their part. And it's also credit that you get. And now you can also say, yes, I'm a contributor to that project. And you can also, again, point your future employers to the code that you did. And I can tell you that in the interviews that I've gone on, they asked about the specific patches that I've submitted. They were looking at my code, they wanted to know why I made the decisions that I made, and this was very beneficial for them to see the way that I worked. And it was very beneficial to me because it showed that I was actually doing stuff. And of course, finding an internship. This one is a bit easier to do in that you don't have to make time for it in your everyday crazy busy life. So I really, really recommend finding a good internship that's going to, you need one that's going to mentor you, you need people to review your code, and I really strongly suggest that you find one that is writing open source code, because at the end of the summer, when you go somewhere else, there's no way for you to show what you've done unless it's open source. You have to be able to show off all the work that you do. Plus, it's pretty nice when you're working on an open source project that you can see what everyone else is doing too. So you know that there's that really hot shot developer. What is that person submitting? Taking a look at the code, the way that they're fixing their bugs, the way that they're writing their tests, it's all incredible, incredible education. Also, you can see the comments that everybody is making on the submitted code changes. So if this person makes a code change that's proposed and then the whole team looks at it and they're all nitpicking everything, that's a mistake that you will not make. That's something else that you know that will save them time and save you time. It's going to be great. But the point is that you really need real experience in engineering. I rely every day on the theory that I learned in school, but that doesn't make up for engineering problems. When you're assigned a problem with a specific set of requirements, that's often not what you get. I often, in fact, every day, when I see a bug, not only do I have to figure out how to fix the bug, but I have to figure out in what way to fix the bug. And if it's going to change the behavior, I have to decide which way I want to change the behavior. These are difficult decisions to make, and the only way to feel more confident about making them is to just get practice doing it. So you have to have practical experience, and an internship is perfect for that. So here's a lot of things that I personally thought as I was getting started. Some good reasons, excuses really, why I was afraid to get started. Flame wars are one that's not on here. My first time that I ever tried to contribute to an open source project, I had no idea what project. I went on an IRC channel, which is an awesome place to meet developers, by the way. So I was on an IRC channel, maybe Python, and I was asking for help in finding a good open source project to contribute to. And the first person to respond said, "What are you doing? You need to quit trying to help at all. Stop using your stupid IDE and learn Vim." And I really wish that I hadn't taken his advice. I love Vim personally, but that's not the point. The point is that I should have been contributing even then. There are small things everywhere, and you just have to find them. And don't get caught up in the flame wars. Vim, Emacs, they're very powerful tools. IDEs are too. Just use whatever is good for you. The second bullet here is something that's extremely important. It's really easy as a newbie to just not know what to do. And in that case, you have a couple of options. You can ask somebody, and they can point you in the right direction, and that's sometimes a good way to go. But it's also sometimes just go for it. Try something. You're not going to break anything. The more experienced people will not let you break anything. So just do something. And if you go off in a totally weird direction, they'll tell you that. It's a very candid field. So they'll tell you, but they will also give you constructive things. They'll say, okay, no, don't do that. This is why this is a better decision. And first of all, you probably figured some things out even on your weird thing. And then on your better solution, you will be more informed as you're building that because you've already re-implemented it in a different way. So just try something, get feedback. And that's an aside. Be good at accepting feedback. There's nothing worse than somebody saying, hey, you take a look at my code, and you're like, oh, well, why don't you do that? That's not quite a good thing to do. Like, oh, well, you've got to accept feedback. Even if somebody is less experienced than you, if they tell you, at least consider it. Because there's probably a reason that they believe that. It might be that somebody told them. And that person may have been way more experienced than you. So it's always worth considering. And you should always be grateful if anybody takes extra time to help you out. Small projects are particularly good for getting started because, first of all, there's a lot that they haven't done yet. There's probably a lot of bugs that they haven't worked through, and those people are really excited to get new people on board. So find those people and ask them what you can do. Again, the Center for Open Science was really big for this, for me. They had a small project that they wanted. It wasn't a priority, so no one was working on it. And so they gave me the opportunity to learn a completely different set of tools than I've ever used and hack something really, really ugly together, which they then told me to calm down, and I fixed and made it better and learned quite a bit along the way. But the biggest thing that I learned was that I could contribute to open source software, that I did know enough to start contributing right then. And the last thing, there's a FOSS fair tomorrow, free and open source software at NC State. You should all go. There's lots of interesting talks. It's actually an unconference, which means that there's no pre-planned talks. Everybody who wants to give a talk will just pitch their idea at the beginning in like 5 seconds or 30 seconds or something, and everybody votes. And so you'll see a lot of cool stuff on Raspberry Pis and Arduinos and robots and weird Linux distributions that somebody made. It's all kinds of stuff. There's no way to know what you're going to get, but it's always good. And actually, when I first saw many of these slides, it was at the FOSS fair. Okay, yes?
Before you move on, I bring this up because the social issue was raised in one of my courses this week. Have you found that when receiving feedback from people in the IT industry that they tend to be very direct in their communication? Have you ever had somebody's feedback hurt your feelings?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Last week, I wrote this really beautiful helper function that was going to refactor all these unit tests to a single line, and it was just awesome. It did everything that I wanted it to do, and it just made writing new unit tests for this one area of our code extremely easy. And I was super proud of it. And somebody was like, hey, so why don't you make this? I was like, oh, all these excellent reasons. And they're like, well, that's cool, but it's really better if a unit test is extremely clear exactly what it's doing. And if you're going over here and doing all this magic stuff, then the developer doesn't know what they're developing. And if there's a problem, they don't know where it's happening. And they were right, but I was really upset about it because it was so beautiful. I just can't stress enough how beautiful it was. It was so cool. And it even lined up very nicely. The length, it looked nice. It was very pleasing. But that actually leads me into this point very well, which is that in this field, and particularly in an open source company, they are generally meritocracies. It doesn't matter who you are. If you've got a good idea, it is listened to. I'm an associate, so I'm bottom, but I regularly comment on principal software engineers' pull requests, and I'm often right, and they often make changes. Sometimes I'm wrong, and they tell me exactly why I'm wrong. But that's not the point. Like, these comments are made to make the code better, and we're all moving forward together. We're all learning, and we're all helping each other do that. So that being said, when we're in a meeting, anybody can speak up at any time. In fact, anyone in the company can speak up at our big company-wide meetings. You can talk directly to the CEO and ask why we did this stupid thing, and he will respond exactly the same way. Because I guess it's probably mostly because it's a tech company, and that there's that culture of the engineering directness. But I really appreciate that I know that if I have a fantastic idea, it will be treated with respect, despite me being new. But there's something even more important than a meritocracy, especially in open source, and that is a do-ocracy. You have to just do stuff. The people who are doing things have much more influence. A good example is that I found this really irritating section of our documentation. And it was very important to me because I just gone through it and I just made all my notes and I wanted to fix it. But it was going to be more work to fix than was something that we could prioritize at the moment. But I knew that if someone else did it, they wouldn't do it the way that I wanted to do it. So I went home and I did it in my own time. And that's me exerting my influence over the team by doing extra things. And this is just always the case. Even when it's what direction do you take the code? Well, the direction is chosen by the person who's actually developing it. So go out there and do stuff, make your changes, and you will begin to see yourself influencing the direction that code is taking. So as far as actually getting a job or an internship, I wanted to talk briefly about that because there are some really important things that I don't know if everyone knows. Okay, first of all, there needs to be a GitHub link on your resume, but that supposes that you have a GitHub account. You have to have a GitHub account. It's kind of unfortunate that we are in a place where there's one place for open source development, but Bitbucket, Google Code, or just don't even bother. Get a GitHub account because that is the single place where everything's happening. And they do a really cool job of making it social. That on your page, for instance, there's a bar that shows how often and when you're contributing to software. So you can look at somebody's GitHub account and immediately know this person is insane. This person has contributed every day for the last 30 years. Well, maybe not. I think it only goes back a year. But the point is, and actually GitHub only goes back to 2007. But the point is, you can immediately know how intense somebody is by looking at their page. And you want people to go to your page and know that you are making these contributions. A lot of younger people will go into a lot of detail about jobs that they've had. It's boring and nobody wants to read it. But what you do want to see is where you went above and beyond the sorts of things that you accomplished rather than did as just part of your regular duties. Short resumes, you're all young, I'm young, my resume is short, that's good, because nobody wants to read it. It's boring. Keep it short. I prefer one page. Just at a glance, what's your deal? Move on. And this last part here, I think is probably the most important. The main thing that you want to show is that you are passionate about what you're doing. And a GitHub link is just a very important part of this. If you're showing that you're doing this stuff for fun on things that are not required, if you're making changes that you see, this shows way more than the fact that you worked at this one place and you did this thing. And make sure it's clean because it really looks bad on you if you misspell something on your resume. So have people with it. Interview process. Think out loud. This is the best advice I've ever gotten, and it's changed. The moment I got this advice, it's changed every interview I've gone on. When somebody asks you a question, they don't want to know that you know the right answer, especially in a technical interview. Like, this is not that important how much you know. What's important is how you think. I'll give an example of my most recent interview where they asked it was kind of an algorithm question, But the question was, what is the minimum number of steps that you can blah, blah, blah? And I said, well, I don't know this algorithm, so let's brute force it. So I went through it and I brute forced it. And I said, well, okay, this is clearly inefficient here and here and here. And I eliminate those things and then clean up the algorithm a little bit. I'm like, I still think I'm losing something here. I cleaned it up. And I eventually did arrive at the correct answer, which was way more powerful in the interview than if I just happened to know the correct answer. They wanted to know how I arrived at the solution. And it actually worked out very well. Don't lie. Everybody starts somewhere, and that includes your interviewer. So if you're like, oh man, I've never used that, but this is what I do know about it, and I'd be interested to know more, that's fine. You can influence the direction of the interview. And this is my favorite point. Embrace uncertainty. So it is a completely legitimate interview answer to say, I have no idea. However, what I would do is I would DuckDuckGo search this phrase. And that goes a long way, because even if you have no idea, the ability to find the information is even more important. Because let's face it, we're all online all the time. So it's not really a good reflection of what you can do to disconnect you from the internet in your interview. But if you can show them that you don't ask Jeeves style, that you've got a powerful way of searching the internet, then I think that goes a long way. Long term, you want to continue to stay engaged with the communities that you're developing for. You don't want to just make one patch to this one thing and then another patch to another. You want to become involved in a single project and really get to know it, because there's a lot that you can learn from a single domain. Hang out with smart and successful people. That's pretty self-explanatory. Your friends will be good influences on you or bad influences on you. If Tim here convinces me to write more code, then Tim's doing good for me. This is, again, obvious, and maybe should be taught to the engineering world a little bit. But if you're respectful, people will be respectful back to you. And if you can get those people that you're with to be more productive also, then it's a bonus. This is your whole team being more productive. And this is them appreciating that you are adding more than just your abilities to the table. You're bringing out their strengths. Again, peers and mentors, but internship, all of you, get one. And be open to feedback. So I mentioned internships many times. So what I would like is for everyone to consider the type of internship that you want. When I got started, I made a specific decision that I wanted to end up in an open source field, and I wanted to be writing in a language that I liked. And at the time it was Python, and actually I still really, really like Python. So I decided that I really wanted to focus on learning those skills. And so I tried to do internships where I would be developing those skills. It is good to widen your horizons, but I think you have to have your primary focus in the tools that you want to be doing a career in. Because if you end up, I don't want to insult anyone by naming specific terrible languages, but if you spend all of your time writing in specific terrible language, but you want to write in this beautiful language, but your experience is over here, then you'll make a lot more money if you go this way. You will never go this way, and you'll be stuck writing whatever. So make sure that your experience is aligned with what you want to do. So we have some internships on my team at Red Hat. There are a lot more internships throughout the company, but the three that I know a bit about because they're under the umbrella of my bigger project, Pulp, which is my team, we're all Python, backend. We do have an API, so there's some web stuff, but there is zero front end, which is where I like to be. Catello is they integrate with us. It's back end, front end. There is a lot of stuff, web development, Ruby on Rails, JavaScript. And Candlepin is a little bit of a strange one. Candlepin is entitlement management to make sure that people only have access to things that they should have access to. But that's in Java, which hopefully I think all of you would know. So I've been told that there was a lot of applicants this year and that the selection process is just now starting. So if you're interested in these, you should get your application in very soon. And the website's just jobs.redhat.com. And you can search all in Raleigh. And if you'd like a specific link, I can give you. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Back to getting started with Linux.
Mm-hmm.
It may be an obvious question, but maybe not. Which distros would you recommend starting with?
Sure. Well, yeah, Arch is a terrible idea. Don't do that.
Debian.
Also, don't do, well, Debian's okay. Don't do Gentoo. Don't do Linux from scratch, although that's a fun thing to do in your spare time. It will really show you how Linux works. That's basically compiling all of your own packages, building your own distribution. It's really fun. You learn a lot. But as far as beginner friendly, Ubuntu is really good. That's the one that I started with. It feels a lot like a Mac, and it's pretty. It's very nice. You can still use the GUI primarily, but I think as you'll get more and more comfortable with Linux, you'll find that you're using the command line much more, and that you can't even do the things that you want to do in the GUI. And as that starts to happen, you may have opinions that start to develop about the differences between the distributions. I'm on Fedora, which is because I'm at Red Hat, but it's really grown on me. Specifically, there's something under the hood called systemd, which is fantastic. But you really don't need to worry about all that stuff. I would just do Ubuntu. Yeah.
You can use any kind of GUI when you work at Red Hat, for example, correct? Like or you can use whatever you want, really.
For operating systems?
Yeah. At Red Hat.
Yeah. Nobody really enforces it. However, the project that I'm working on only works on Red Hat-based Linux. So I can use, I could develop it on Red Hat 6, 7, or Fedora. Or CentOS, actually, I could do that too. And a lot of people do develop on CentOS. So yeah, you can use whatever you want, but it's sometimes best to go with the grain and develop on what everyone else is developing on, so that you have less really strange problems. But you can configure it in whatever way you want. I'm using a weird window manager. Nobody knows, and nobody cares. I discovered this because I try to tell everyone about it because it's so cool, but nobody wants to hear it. Yeah.
Well, I know, man.
Ooh, I'm using i3. i3, it's very strong for use without a mouse. Here, so you've got this bar down here at the bottom, and that shows you basic system information like Wi-Fi, power, that kind of stuff. But then you've got all these different tabs, and you have access to your path up here. So I'm just going to Libre. Okay. So it allows you to pop back and forth between things extremely easily, and I've got it set up really nicely for my monitors. So the same sorts of things go on the same monitors. You develop idioms, and it allows you to be extremely efficient. You don't spend time, which tab is I on? It's fantastic. I really love it. Yes.
So I kind of already know the answer to this question, but I'm asking anyway. How does the open source community make money?
Oh yeah, this is so Red Hat for those of you who don't know Red Hat, we're primarily known for Linux. In fact, I'm pretty sure that you all have shell access, and when you have shell access, you're logging into Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So Red Hat's a big company. I think they made $1.5 billion last year. So the question is always, how does a company make so much money selling free software? And the answer is support. Our biggest, by a lot, line item is selling Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So what you do is you buy a subscription to Linux, and you've got all of our engineers behind you. We've got support, we've got excellent support, and we'll make sure that whatever has gone wrong is, first we'll make sure it's not our fault, and if it is, we'll fix it. And if it's not our fault, we'll help you find what the problem actually is. But we hear always that our support is amazing, and because it's Linux, it's much more flexible system. So it tends to be the de facto choice for big companies for web servers and that sort of stuff. Anyone else? Yeah.
What kind of advice could you give interns starting out at a large tech company?
Oh, well, yeah, I just did this, so I can offer some things. First is it's not as scary as it sounds. I went through a very corporate 2-day like orientation thing, and they really showered us with all kinds of facts and things like that, and it was interesting. But when it came down to it, when my first real day, it was just a small team, and I mostly deal with my small team. And if I deal with anyone outside of my team, it's within our bigger team, which is still not that big. So it's not it's not as big as it might seem. You're within a subdivision. That being said, there are a lot of things that make a bigger stir, like to get promoted, that kind of stuff. They really, really like cross-team collaboration, communication, that stuff. So, you know, the same advice is everywhere. Be friendly, meet people, make sure that they know who you are, offer your help whenever you can. Everybody's on IRC at Red Hat all the time. Like it's actually, I think, required of you. So I've got my own team IRC channel, and we talk about things. And every now and then, someone will pop in there and ask a question. Help it. Help them solve their problem. Sometimes it's something that you can help with. Sometimes it's something you've seen before, and you can help them easily. And sometimes it fits more along the lines of just jump in and try. Don't tell them to do anything dangerous, but you know, even if you tell them the absolute stupidest thing to do, the first thing that will happen is that someone else on your team will notice that you just said something stupid and will jump in there and start helping them. So whatever happened, you just help that person get help faster. And you learn a lot in the process anyway. Anyone else? Cool. Well, thank you for having me.
Stop now. No.